The evening sun cast long shadows across the marble floors of the Grand Plaza Hotel as a young woman pushed through the heavy revolving doors, pulling a well-worn suitcase behind her. Mai had just completed a 6-hour flight, and exhaustion was written all over her face. Her simple blue jeans and oversized sweater stood in stark contrast to the hotel's glittering chandeliers and gold-trimmed walls. As she approached the front desk, she couldn't help but notice how other guests in their designer clothes seemed to float effortlessly through the lobby, their expensive luggage wheeled by eager bellhops. Meanwhile, she stood there, adjusting the strap of her backpack that had seen better days. The receptionist, Rita Barrett, barely looked up from her computer screen when Mai reached the counter. She was in her mid-40s, with perfectly styled hair and manicured nails that clicked against her keyboard with sharp, irritated taps. The golden nameplate on her chest gleamed under the chandelier light, matching her obviously expensive jewelry. Yes, Rita's voice dripped with disinterest as she continued typing, not bothering to make eye contact. "Hi. I have a reservation for 5 nights," Mai said softly, trying to maintain her composure despite her tiredness. Rita finally looked up, her eyes scanning Mai from head to toe with the kind of look usually reserved for something unpleasant found on the bottom of a shoe. "A reservation? Here? Are you sure you have the right hotel?" The question hung in the air like an insult. A couple nearby, dressed in matching Gucci outfits, snickered quietly. Mai felt her cheeks grow warm, but she stood her ground, remembering everything her father had taught her about dignity and self-respect. "Yes, I'm sure," Mai replied, her voice steady despite her embarrassment. She pulled out her phone to show the confirmation email. It should be under the name Lynn. Rita's perfectly plucked eyebrows arched higher as she reluctantly began typing into her computer. The clicking of her acrylic nails against the keyboard seemed deliberately slower than before, as if she was hoping Mai would give up and leave. "Oh," Rita's voice dripped with fake surprise. "It seems there might be a technical error with your reservation." She smiled, but it didn't reach her eyes. "Perhaps you'd be more comfortable at the Budget Inn down the street. It's more." She paused dramatically, suited to certain types of travelers. A few other guests in the lobby had stopped to watch the scene unfold. Some looked uncomfortable, while others seemed amused by Rita's obvious disdain. An elderly couple shook their heads disapprovingly, but said nothing. Mai clutched her phone tighter, her knuckles turning white. She knew perfectly well there was nothing wrong with her reservation. She had checked it 3 times before arriving. But Rita's dismissive attitude and thinly veiled insults were starting to wear her down after such a long day. What Rita didn't know, what none of them knew, was that Mai wasn't just any ordinary guest. She had a purpose for being there, one that would soon turn Rita's world upside down. But for now, she simply stood there, exhausted and humiliated, wondering if this was how all guests without designer clothes and expensive luggage were treated at the Grand Plaza. "Could you please check again?" Mai asked politely, maintaining her composure. "I received a confirmation email, and my payment has already been processed." Rita sighed dramatically, as if Mai was being particularly difficult. "I suppose I can check one more time," she said, making it clear that this was a huge inconvenience. "But I must warn you, our rooms start at $800 per night. Are you sure you can afford that?" The question was meant to shame, to diminish. But little did Rita know. Her words were being carefully noted, each dismissive gesture and condescending tone cataloged in Mai's mind for later. Because sometimes the most powerful lessons come from unexpected teachers, and Rita was about to become an unwitting instructor in the art of humility. After 20 minutes of Rita's theatrical typing and exaggerated sighs, Mai finally received her room key. It came with a warning that seemed more like a threat. "Remember, any damage to the room will be charged to your credit card." Rita's smile was sharp as a knife as she added, "And we're very particular about our furnishings." Mai reached for the key, but Rita held onto it for a moment too long, forcing Mai to nearly pull it from her fingers. The elevators are that way, Rita said, pointing vaguely without offering to call a bellhop for Mei's luggage. Though the staff elevator might be more appropriate. As Mei wheeled her suitcase toward the main elevators, she heard Rita's voice carry across the lobby. Can you believe some people? They see a few pictures online and think they belong anywhere. The comment was followed by muffled laughter from another staff member. The elevator ride to the 15th floor felt endless. Mei shared it with a group of businessmen who automatically shifted away from her, as if her modest clothing might somehow contaminate their expensive suits. One of them even pulled his designer briefcase closer, making Mei feel like a suspected thief. When she finally reached her room, Mei discovered it was located next to the ice machine and housekeeping storage, the noisiest spot on the floor. Of course, Rita had given her this room on purpose. Through the thin walls, she could hear the constant rumble of the ice maker and the clatter of cleaning carts. Mei set down her bags and took a deep breath. The room itself was beautiful, with a stunning view of the city, but even this seemed tainted by Rita's earlier behavior. She picked up the room service menu, her stomach growling after the long journey. It had been hours since her last meal. When she called to place an order, she immediately recognized Rita's voice. Apparently, the receptionist also handled room service calls during her shift. "Oh, it's you?" Rita said, not bothering to hide her disdain. "You know, room service has a minimum order requirement of $75. "That's fine," Mei replied calmly. "I'd like to order the grilled salmon with vegetables." "The salmon is unavailable," Rita responded too quickly. "Perhaps something more budget-friendly? The hamburger, maybe. Though there is an additional service charge for certain rooms." Mei ordered the hamburger, too tired to argue. An hour and a half later, when her food finally arrived, the burger was cold and the fries were soggy. The delivery person didn't even make eye contact, practically dropping the tray on the desk before hurrying out. Later that evening, Mei tried to access the hotel's Wi-Fi, but her room's connection kept dropping. When she called the front desk for assistance, Rita informed her that premium internet access was reserved for premium guests, whatever that meant. As Mei lay in bed that night, listening to the endless clunking of the ice machine, she thought about all the other guests who might have endured similar treatment. How many people had walked through those doors, excited for a special stay, only to be made to feel small and unwelcome? She pulled out her tablet and began taking detailed notes about everything that had happened. The discriminatory comments, the poor service, the unavailable amenities, everything. With each point she wrote down, her resolve strengthened. This wasn't just about her anymore. It was about every person who had ever been judged by their appearance or assumed wealth. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, she was sure. Rita seemed like the type to hold a grudge, and Mei had no doubt that the receptionist would find more ways to make her stay uncomfortable. But that was exactly what she needed to document. Sometimes, the best way to fix a broken system was to experience its flaws firsthand. As she finally drifted off to sleep, Mei smiled slightly, thinking about how Rita's attitude would change when she learned the truth. But for now, she would continue playing her role, gathering evidence of how the other half lived in this supposed luxury hotel. After all, as her father always said, true character is revealed in how you treat those you think can't help or hurt you. Morning sunlight streamed through the windows as Mei sat in the hotel's restaurant, carefully observing the staff's interactions with different guests. The contrast in service was impossible to miss. While other diners received warm greetings and prompt attention, the waiters seemed to develop sudden hearing problems whenever she raised her hand. Her simple breakfast order took 45 minutes to arrive. When it finally came, the eggs were cold and the toast was burnt. She noticed Rita, who had apparently appointed herself as her personal tormentor, whispering to the waitstaff and pointing in her direction with poorly concealed smirks. What they didn't notice was the subtle way Mei documented everything on her phone, or how she watched the security camera's positions with keen interest. They were too busy laughing at her worn sneakers to notice her taking pictures of the restaurant's health and safety certificates on the wall, or how she studied the emergency exit plans with unusual attention to detail. Around noon, a sleek black car pulled up to the hotel entrance. The doorman, who had previously ignored Mai completely, suddenly snapped to attention. A distinguished-looking man in his 60s stepped out, his salt and pepper hair neatly combed, wearing a simple but perfectly tailored suit. He smiled warmly at the doorman, who seemed surprised by his friendliness. This was Mr. Lin, though nobody except May knew who he really was. To the staff, he was just another guest, albeit one who looked wealthy enough to deserve their respect. Rita's entire demeanor changed when she spotted him walking through the lobby. She straightened her blazer and plastered on her most professional smile. "Welcome to Grand Plaza Hotel, sir," she practically sang out. "How may I assist you today?" Mr. Lin approached the front desk with unhurried steps. "I'm here to meet someone," he said pleasantly. His eyes scanned the lobby with the careful attention of someone who noticed everything but pretended to notice nothing. "Of course, sir. May I ask who you're meeting?" "I'd be happy to call up to their room," Rita offered eagerly, already reaching for the phone. "Oh, that won't be necessary," he replied, his eyes twinkling with subtle amusement. "I believe I see her now." Rita followed his gaze, her perfectly maintained smile freezing when she saw him walking toward May, who had just emerged from the restaurant. The color drained from Rita's face as she watched Mr. Lin embrace Mai warmly. "How's your stay been, sweetheart?" he asked, loud enough for nearby staff to hear. "Quite educational, Dad," May responded, matching his volume. "I've learned a lot about how this hotel treats its guests." The lobby fell silent. Rita's mouth opened and closed like a fish out of water. The same waiters who had been ignoring me all morning suddenly found the floor extremely interesting to look at. Mr. Lin turned toward the front desk, his kind face now showing a hint of steel beneath the smile. "Rita, isn't it?" he asked, reading her nameplate. "I believe we should have a chat. You see, I'm not just here to visit my daughter. I'm also here because I recently bought this hotel chain, and I asked May to help me understand how our staff treats different types of guests." The silence in the lobby grew heavier. A few guests who had witnessed May's treatment over the past day were now watching the scene unfold with great interest. The elderly couple from the previous evening nodded in satisfaction. We didn't know," Rita stammered, her face now as pale as the marble countertop she stood behind. "That's exactly the point," Mai said quietly. "Nobody should be treated differently based on how they look or what they wear. Every guest deserves respect, whether they're wearing designer clothes or discount store finds." The hotel manager, who had materialized as if by magic upon hearing the words, "bought this hotel chain," was now hovering anxiously nearby, his forehead shiny with sweat. He had no idea that the real drama was just beginning, or that this morning's events would lead to the biggest shakeup in the hotel's history. The next few hours at the Grand Plaza Hotel felt like a whirlwind. Word of what happened in the lobby spread through the staff like wildfire. Rita had disappeared to the break room, claiming she needed a moment to collect herself. But everyone knew she was hiding from the embarrassment of her situation. The hotel manager, Mr. Parker, had rushed Mr. Lin and May into his office, apologizing profusely the entire way. His hands shook as he offered them premium coffee from his personal coffee maker, nearly spilling it twice in the process. The same coffee that Rita had told Mai was reserved for VIP guests only, just that morning. "I assure you, this isn't how we typically treat our guests," Mr. Parker said, wiping his forehead with a handkerchief. "Rita's behavior is completely unacceptable, and she will be terminated immediately." Mr. Lin raised his hand, stopping Mr. Parker mid-sentence. "Before we make any hasty decisions, I'd like to hear what my daughter has to say. Me, you've experienced this firsthand. What do you think should be done?" Mai pulled out her tablet, where she documented everything from the past 24 hours. "It's not just about Rita," she began. "I've noticed a pattern of discrimination throughout the hotel. The bellhops who suddenly become busy when certain guests arrive, the waiters who take forever to serve tables with younger or casually dressed customers, the housekeeping staff who rush through some rooms while spending extra time in others." She showed them photographs and videos she'd taken, along with detailed notes about times, dates, and specific incidents. Mr. Parker's face grew increasingly pale as he realized the extent of the problem. But Mai continued, "I don't think firing people is the solution. These attitudes are deeply rooted, and they won't change just by replacing one person with another. We need to address the underlying issue." Just then, a knock at the office door interrupted them. It was Rita, her eyes red and puffy, her perfectly styled hair now slightly disheveled. "May I come in?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. Mr. Lin nodded, and Rita stepped into the office, looking nothing like the confident, dismissive woman from earlier. "I want to apologize," she said, her voice shaking. "I know it's not enough, but I need to say it. I've worked here for 15 years, and somewhere along the way, I started judging people based on all the wrong things." She turned to Mai, finally meeting her eyes. "The way I treated you was horrible. I've been standing in the break room, thinking about all the other guests I might have treated the same way over the years. People who saved up for a special occasion, who were excited to stay here, and I probably ruined their experience because of my prejudices." Mai looked at her father, who gave her a slight nod. This was her project, her experience, and he was letting her take the lead on how to handle it. "You know," Mai said thoughtfully, "there's an opportunity here. Instead of just punishing people, we could make this a learning moment for the entire hotel chain. Rita, you've just had a powerful realization about your own behavior. What if you helped us develop a training program to make sure this doesn't happen to anyone else?" Rita looked up, surprised. "You'd give me that chance? After how I treated you?" "Sometimes," Mr. Lin said quietly, "the best teachers are those who have learned the hardest lessons themselves." Mr. Parker, who had been furiously taking notes, looked up eagerly. "We could make it a company-wide initiative. Regular training sessions, anonymous guest feedback systems, maybe even a mystery guest program to ensure standards are maintained." The tension in the room began to shift into something more productive. Even Rita's posture changed as she started suggesting ideas based on her years of experience, this time focusing on how to make every guest feel valued. As the discussion continued, Mai noticed a small group of employees hovering nervously outside the office door, obviously worried about their jobs. She caught her father's eye and nodded toward them. Mr. Lin understood immediately. Mr. Lin walked to the office door and opened it wide, inviting the nervous employees inside. The small office quickly became crowded as bellhops, waiters, and housekeeping staff filed in, their faces showing a mix of fear and uncertainty. Some of them had been part of Rita's inner circle, while others had simply followed her lead out of habit or fear of becoming targets themselves. "Please, don't be afraid," Mr. Lin said warmly. "We're not here to punish anyone. We're here to make things better." He turned to his daughter. "May, would you like to share your experience with everyone?" Mai stood up, looking at the faces around her. She recognized the waiter who had deliberately ignored her at breakfast, the housekeeping staff who had rushed through cleaning her room, and the bellhop who had pretended not to see her struggling with her luggage. But instead of anger, she felt determination to create real change. "For the past day, I've experienced what it's like to be judged based on appearances," she began. "I've been ignored, mocked, and treated as less than human, all because I wasn't wearing expensive clothes or carrying designer bags." The staff members shifted uncomfortably, some looking at the floor, others stealing glances at Rita, who was now sitting quietly in the corner, her earlier pride completely deflated. "But here's the thing," Mai continued. "I could have walked in here yesterday wearing my usual clothes, announced who I was, and demanded special treatment. Instead, I chose to come as an ordinary guest because I wanted to understand how our hotels truly treat people. And what I found was disappointing, but it's also fixable. A young housekeeper raised her hand tentatively. "I've always felt bad about rushing through some rooms while spending extra time in others," she admitted. "But it felt like that's what was expected of us." "That's exactly what we need to change," Mr. Parker chimed in, seeming to find his confidence again. "From now on, every guest deserves our best service, regardless of how they look or what they're wearing." Rita stood up, her voice stronger now. "I'd like to share something too," she said. "For years, I've been teaching new staff members all the wrong things. I show them how to spot important guests based on their clothes or jewelry. I created a culture of discrimination, and I didn't even realize how wrong it was until today." One of the bellhops spoke up, "But what about tips? The wealthy guests usually tip better." Mr. Lin smiled. "What if we implemented a fair wage system where you don't have to depend on tips? Where treating every guest with respect is rewarded through performance bonuses based on genuine customer feedback." The room buzzed with excited whispers. Mai watched as the staff members began sharing their own stories and suggestions. A waiter admitted to feeling guilty about ignoring younger guests. A concierge confessed to giving different restaurant recommendations based on how wealthy guests appeared to be. "Starting today," Mr. Lin announced, "we're going to create a new standard for hospitality. One where every guest feels valued, where every staff member takes pride in providing excellent service to everyone, and where we judge success by the smiles on our guests' faces, not the price of their clothes." The tension in the room had completely transformed into enthusiasm. Even Rita was actively participating, suggesting ways to retrain staff and implement new service standards. Her years of experience, now redirected toward positive change, could prove invaluable. As they wrapped up the impromptu meeting, Mr. Lin made one final announcement. "To help us understand our guests better, we'll be starting a new program. Every month, members of our management team will stay at different hotels in our chain, not as VIPs, but as ordinary guests. They'll experience our service firsthand, just as Mai did." The staff erupted in applause, and Mai noticed something remarkable. Genuine smiles had replaced the forced ones she'd seen yesterday. Real change was beginning, starting right here in this overcrowded office, spreading through the hotel like a wave of fresh air. 3 months flew by like pages turning in a book. The Grand Plaza Hotel had transformed in ways nobody could have predicted. The lobby, once a place of judgment and whispers, now buzzed with genuine warmth and welcome. Rita, surprisingly, had become the driving force behind this change. On this particular morning, she stood at her familiar spot behind the front desk, but everything else was different. Gone was the artificial smile and judgmental glare. Instead, she greeted a young backpacker with the same enthusiasm she showed to a businessman in an expensive suit. "Welcome to Grand Plaza," she said warmly to the backpacker. "You must be tired from your journey. Would you like some fresh water while I check you in?" The young traveler's surprised smile showed that this wasn't the welcome they had expected from a luxury hotel. Rita caught her reflection in the polished marble wall. She looked different now, more genuine, more at peace with herself. The past 3 months had changed her in ways she never expected. She had thrown herself into creating the hotel's new training program, using her own story as a powerful example of how prejudices could blind people to their own behavior. "You know," she often told new staff during training sessions, "I used to think I was doing my job well by catering to wealthy guests. But I was actually failing at the most basic part of hospitality, treating every person with dignity and respect." The hotel's new mystery guest program had become a huge success. Every week, staff members would try to guess who might be the undercover evaluator, only to learn valuable lessons about their own biases. Sometimes it was the quiet elderly lady who turned out to be a famous author. Other times, it was the teenager in ripped jeans who was actually a tech millionaire. Mr. Lin and Mai visited regularly, not as owners, but as ordinary guests, sometimes dressed in luxury brands, other times in simple clothes. They were pleased to see that the service remained consistently excellent regardless of their appearance. The changes spread beyond the Grand Plaza. Other hotels in the chain began adopting the same training programs and policies. Rita found herself traveling to different locations, sharing her experience and helping other staff members recognize and overcome their own prejudices. One day, almost exactly 3 months after the incident that started it all, Rita received a special guest, the elderly couple who had witnessed her cruel treatment of Mai that first night. They were surprised to see her still working there. "We came back because we heard this place had changed," the elderly woman said. "We didn't expect to see you here." Rita smiled genuinely. "I'm glad you came back. I'm not the same person you met 3 months ago. Would you like to hear what happened?" As she told them the story, other guests gathered around to listen. The elderly couple's expressions changed from skepticism to amazement as they witnessed firsthand how the hotel had transformed. Later that evening, during a staff meeting, Mr. Lin made a surprise appearance. He looked around the room at the faces that had become family over the past 3 months. Rita, Mr. Parker, the bellhops, the housekeeping staff, all now united in their mission to provide excellent service to every guest. "I have an announcement to make," he said. "The Grand Plaza's customer satisfaction ratings have reached their highest point in the hotel's history. But more importantly, we've created something precious here. A place where every person who walks through those doors feels valued." Me, who had quietly slipped into the back of the room, stepped forward. "The real luxury of a hotel isn't in its marble floors or crystal chandeliers," she said. "It's in how it makes people feel. And thanks to all of you, we've created true luxury, the luxury of kindness." The story of the Grand Plaza's transformation became legendary in the hospitality industry. People often asked Rita if she regretted her past behavior. "I don't regret it," she would say, "because without that wake-up call, I wouldn't be who I am today." Sometimes the biggest mistakes lead to the most important changes. As the sun set over the city, casting a golden glow through the hotel's windows, Rita watched a new group of guests arrive. A mix of people from all walks of life. Each would receive the same warm welcome, the same excellent service, the same respect. Because in the end, that's what true hospitality was all about, seeing the dignity in every person who walked through those doors, regardless of what they wore or carried. And somewhere in the city, Mai smiled, knowing that her little experiment had created waves of change that would continue to ripple outward, touching lives in ways she never imagined possible.